Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Okay, welcome again everyone to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. When responding, be sure to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources that you see shared in the chat box, will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. And finally, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Additionally, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we invite you to join us again for a session on aligning state and local investments for durable change. Next week on June 28th, we'll invite you to wrap up the month with a session on Ready for Children, Seamless Transitions into Kindergarten. And then the following week, July 5th, we'll bring it back with another exciting doubleheader. First, a funder-to-funder conversation, a special rebroadcast on early school success, and at 3 p.m., another special rebroadcast on starting early, state investments that support children's language and literacy development. Registration and more information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now. And finally, I would like to invite all of you to save the date for GLR Week 2022. It will be in the week of July 18th through the 22nd. We will be sending out promotional emails and some more information for registration and timing for events throughout the week, but we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Sarah Torien, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our second in a special series of funder-to-funder conversations focused on the more than money philanthropy roles that funders can play to advance their mission. While many think of money when they think about a funder, the reality is that a funder's value goes far beyond the check. The funders in the GLR network are investing in countless critical programs and strategies to advance children's early school success, and we have featured many of those in these funder-focused sessions. But the funders do so much more, and so we also want to use this space to explore some of those more than money roles that funders can play and do to great consequence. Today's session, Convening for Greater Impact, will explore an incredible example of the convening power of funders, the National Character Initiative, sponsored by the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation beginning in 2014 as the foundation was preparing to sunset. I am delighted to be joined today by two previous leaders of the Bechtel Foundation, two of the key consulting partners who supported them in playing that convening role, and two of the grantees who benefited from the communities of practice formed as a part of that initiative. Together, they will discuss why they chose to focus on this convening role, how they brought the grantees together and built strong and trusting relationships among them, and what the grantees, partners, and foundation staff gained through the process. And to begin that conversation, I'm incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Erin Giron. Erin currently serves as an advisor to the Torlakson Whole Child Institute and as a strategic consultant to labor unions, state governments, foundations, and nonprofits. Previously, he served as the Associate Director of Education at the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, leading grant making and education policy and advocacy to support California's implementation of math and science content standards, improve educator preparation, expand civic learning, advance the use of whole child research in school and community settings, and increase investments in environmental literacy. While at Bechtel, he played a key role in the National Character Initiative and is therefore, I think, the perfect person to moderate today's conversation. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Erin, and so you can introduce the rest of the panel and guide us through this conversation.
Well, thank you, Sarah. What a privilege to be here. I have been such a beneficiary of the grade level reading campaign and these Learning Tuesdays and gained so much from it. This is amazing, an amazing opportunity for me. Let me provide a little context for this session today before I dive into the introducing this accomplished panel that we have for you. In 2009, Stephen Bechtel and the board of the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation decided to invest all assets to pursue lasting solutions to protect the environment and improve the places children learn and develop in schools and in communities. In California, the foundation worked with government, higher education, and community organizations to advance STEM education, environmental literacy, educator preparation, expanded learning, social emotional learning, and civic engagement. When you're in spend down mode, you have to cover a lot of bases. Nationally, though, we only had one strategy. That was the National Character Initiative. As Stephen Bechtel explained to all of us, he attributed his success in life to key experiences, adults he had as a young person. And he felt passionately that all young people should have these experiences. That's why the foundation decided to invest $130 million in the nation's leading youth-serving organizations. Today, you'll hear from two prominent leaders in those organizations, and they'll tell you about their experiences and what money can buy. But beyond that, what working together and working with the foundation beyond the money can really gain. One more piece of context I want to share, and that's this, and it's why today is so important as a Learning Tuesday. The foundation made the decision to spend down in 2009. We accomplished it in 2020, and we couldn't have done it without learning from colleagues in philanthropy. Atlantic Philanthropies, the Rakes Foundation, Wallace Foundation, W.T. Grant Foundation, on and on. We really look to them for lessons learned, both the hard ones and the ones that pointed to new directions in how we could support the fields that we wanted to make an impact in. And I've got to tell you, it helped us as professionals and as a foundation be more empathetic, more strategic, more responsive, and really understand that grant making isn't just about giving away money, it's about the hands that you put it in. So with that, let me turn to this august panel and tell you a little bit about them. First, my former colleague and somebody I've actually worked with for nearly 20 years in different capacities, Rebecca Goldberg. Currently, she serves as a nonprofit and philanthropic advisor, working with clients to connect strategy and ideas, identify new opportunities, develop high impact partnerships, and strengthen grant making and grant seeking approaches. Before Bechtel, well, she was a senior program officer at the Bechtel Foundation, and she played a leading role in the foundation's spend down strategy, including the National Character Initiative. That bio doesn't fully capture the leadership that Rebecca showed on this particular initiative, and as she's done much of her career, and she's very seasoned and experienced in this work. Joining her is Dr. Tasha Franklin Johnson of the YMCA. She's the Senior Director of Equity and Youth Development at the Y of the USA. And she draws from experience working with community-based organizations, philanthropists, and citizens working to provide external support and capacity to local education systems. The YMCA, as you know, was a grantee of the National Character Initiative, and Tasha was a critical leader, and she taught us and really brought us forward and worked in the community practice, and she's going to tell you about that experience today. We also have a good partner and friend to the Bechtel Jr. Foundation, David LaPiana. Now David is the founder and managing partner of LaPiana Consulting, where he helps social sector executives develop powerful strategies while becoming better leaders for their staff, board, and communities. He certainly did that for us at the foundation, and as you'll see, he did that for the National Character Initiative. He's authored a number of popular books and articles on nonprofit management, David and his firm played a leadership role in helping develop the national character strategy and helping to initiate it and implement it to get it off the ground, including facilitating a community of learning and practice for the CEOs of our National Character Initiative. With David, we have Michael Randel, the director of Randel Consulting Associates, and a critical partner to us in forming the convenings and the learning strategies over time. Michael works with leaders, teams, and organizations going through change and growth through mechanisms such as grantee peer community convenings. He led the team that designed and hosted the National Character Initiative peer convenings for 5 years, involving 80 leaders. Michael and Rebecca were presented with the Platinum Facilitation Impact Award in 2021 for this work, which is seen as one of the 3 most impactful examples of facilitation worldwide. Well deserved. And last, but certainly not least, Jennifer Sarangelo. Jennifer leads the National 4-H Council in its mission to increase investment and participation in high quality 4-H positive youth development programs. She joined in the council in 2006. 4-H was a grantee of the initiative, and Jennifer participated in the CEO community practice. Jennifer and Tasha were amazing partners to the Bechtel Jr. Foundation. They pushed us and really helped us create a better strategy. So with that, let's turn to Rebecca and have her set the stage for today's conversation. Rebecca, could you turn on your, there we go.
Here.
Rebecca, can you give us an overview of the National Character Initiative? What were the goals, and who were the grantees?
Sure, happy to be here. I'm delighted to share about this experience with everyone. So as Aaron mentioned, this really was a passion of Mr. Bechtel himself. It came from his own personal life experience. And as he looked forward into this time-limited spend down, when we developed this strategy, we had about 5-6 years to implement something that would impact as many kids as possible. And the scale was really important to the foundation and to Mr. Bechtel. He wanted as many kids to have those types of positive youth development experiences, having adult mentors in their lives, and character building opportunities as possible. So we looked at how could we reach as many kids as possible with that 5 to 6 year timeline, and landed on working with a set of national organizations that work with young people across the country. Collectively, we added up, they serve about half the kids in this country outside of the school day, and thought that was a pretty good reach. And as we thought about this time frame, what could we accomplish? We knew we wouldn't see a change in the youth outcomes necessarily in such a short time frame. So instead of thinking about youth outcomes, we really focused on the adults. We thought about how can we shift the behavior and the practices of those adult staff and volunteers who are working with these organizations, with young people in all different settings, to really foster those character development opportunities and experiences, be more intentional about it. We knew that character development was a critical part of their mission. They may talk about it different ways, whether it was social emotional learning or being strong, smart, and bold as part of the Girls Inc. experience, or actually saying character development in the language. But we found organizations that were aligned in their mission, and then we worked with each of them to think about how can we help you be more intentional. So this was in the spend down for the foundation, an intentional shift away from our local direct service grant making to a more systems approach. And as Aaron mentioned, it was actually a national approach, the only national strategy that we had at the foundation. And so that was new for us. And we took our time getting to know these national youth organizations. So we had all the big nationals. We had National 4-H Council, of course, and the YMCA of the USA, Boys and Girls Clubs of America, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Girls Inc. and Campfire and Boy Scouts. And then we had a couple of thematic cohorts. So you heard an interest in environmental literacy was also a focus at the foundation. And so we found a way to really push that forward, combined with character development experiences, working with Outward Bound and Nature Bridge and Student Conservation Association. And then we also focused on sports and play as a prime opportunity for developing character with Playworks and Coaching Core and Positive Coaching Alliance, who have since merged. So we had a really interesting mix of organizations. We also invested in a state strategy, knowing that California had a really robust after school fueled public investment, and that we thought of California's after school programs as a bit of a mini national strategy in of itself. And so we brought them into the mix, a number of intermediaries in the California Department of Education. And then we also had a number of policy and field supporting organizations. So it was an interesting mix of these big nationals, some smaller nationals, and then state intermediaries and policy and advocacy organizations who came together, all with this goal of influencing and elevating character development practices.
So a focus on the adults, but also thinking about the systems that support the adults. You know, when I'm looking at the people who are on this webinar, it's all over the map. We have foundations, we have school districts, we have government, all folks who are using money and have ways in which they have to do it. What was the Bechtel way of doing that? Why the focus on peer learning?
Well, you know, the foundation had invested in communities of practice before, you know, with our math and science work throughout the state of California. That was really done through bringing districts together to learn from one another, big and small districts, learning from similar types of partners across the state, and really believing in investing in those educators themselves, knowing best how to do this work. And then with the character initiative, it actually was not part of our initial strategy. The initial strategy was to make these very large, you know, multi-year grants, you know, ranging from $5 to $20 million per organization over 5 years. So these were pretty big grants. And some of them were investing in their training system. Some were actually capacity building at their national offices. And what we found when we first started making those grants was that every organization wanted to do a literature review of the evidence around character development practices. And that makes a lot of sense. You want to base it on the evidence. But instead of, you know, paying each organization to do that literature review, we decided the foundation will actually invest in that type of review, research review. We worked with the National Academies of Science to put together a workshop on all of the evidence and research behind character development practices. And we decided to invite everyone to Washington, D.C. to go to this workshop. So we sort of inadvertently created the first grantee convening by bringing folks together to hear the research together. And I knew if we had everyone there in Washington, D.C., let's take advantage of it and leverage that opportunity. And let's help them, knowing the advantage of peer learning and reflection. Let's bring them together afterwards so that they can reflect and process what they heard. It would be a lot of information that they would get in this workshop. And so I knew we needed a facilitator, and sought out Michael. I was able to meet him at a conference, and knew from his previous work with early childhood funders that he was really skilled in bringing together similar organizations or similarly missioned organizations that may be competitors, and creating space for them to learn together. So, you know, this strategy really emerged out of seeing all of these leaders in one room, and the energy was palpable, and that they really wanted more of that opportunity to learn from one another and talk to each other and get to know one another. And came back from that convening and said, you know what, I think there's something here. I think we should be pitching a community of practice amongst these organizations. And, you know, from there, ended up pitching it to our leaders at the foundation and to the grantees, and to ask, would this be useful?
Thank you, Rebecca. And you know, you're giving me a real hook on more than money here, right? Because it's like, what else can we do to help grantees be effective? And you had sports and play, you had environmentally focused grantees, and you had the big, you know, grand national youth organizations like 4-H and the Y. So how did you think about, what kind of partners did you need to bring together to help support these grantees?
So we started with the facilitation. That was, you know, I knew from my previous experience as a grantee being brought to these types of convenings, and, you know, just through facilitation work and training, you needed to have space for everyone to build community, to build trust, that we needed them to find commonality in what they could learn together, but also, you know, how they differ and the unique value they each bring to the room. And, you know, Michael Randel was our perfect partner in helping create that space. And, and he shared from his previous experience. We knew as a foundation, we needed to invest in it. It was not a cheap strategy bringing folks together. We did put resources behind it. We wanted these organizations to feel honored, respected, that their time was valuable. So putting together really well-planned, convenings based on their feedback and interests, nice hotels, nice dinners together. It was a whole experience. And so that facilitation piece was critical. And I think we'll get more into the different types of communities of practice, because David LaPiana was also a critical part, not only in the strategy development and implementation of the strategy, but also facilitating the CEO peer learning community. And so I know he'll talk about that. And then as we got further into the initiative, we brought some other supports into the mix. So we wanted these organizations to be able to communicate put their best foot forward. We knew the foundation funding would end. So what would support them beyond the funding? We helped them with their communications. So we brought in a communications partner that worked with each of those organizations, helped them tell their story, put together videos for them, which they presented to each other. And we invited other funders in to hear their presentations of what they had learned over the last several years. And it really helped them articulate what it is that they're doing differently now. And then we also had a research partner. So we had American Institutes for Research come in and help them with implementation from, looking at the evidence. How does this translate into practice? And so there was some consultation available to these organizations, both on the communications and the research to practice side.
Before we move to David, let me just ask you on the partnership piece, and we're going back in time a little bit, obviously. There was a big social-emotional learning movement that was happening and gaining momentum, but we also had the youth development movement, which was older and had really still been trying to elevate, and an emerging science of learning development movement. Were there other learning partners that you had to incorporate into the mix?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We wanted to leverage that emerging science. We wanted to make sure our grantees knew of all of the latest research. So we used those convening opportunities to bring in key speakers like Karen Pittman and Linda Darling-Hammond, folks who are in the center of this work who, may know these organizations, but weren't partnering directly. And so this was an opportunity to absolutely get these, cutting edge research and researchers in front of the folks, but also to engage with the grantees. So that was it. We learned that these convenings were part of really an influence strategy, both within these organizations themselves, spanning out to their affiliates across the country, but also in connecting these key leaders with other education leaders across the country who may not be thinking about the youth development field as a key part of that social emotional learning movement.
Yeah, I can see the convenings was a platform to bring in research expertise, system expertise, and so forth. Well, let's turn to David now, because the strategy, you can really see the coherence in the way Rebecca described it. But I think when foundations and boards in particular, David, enter into a new space, it is really challenging for them to make decisions, especially when the money is this big. So can you tell us a little bit about your role? Actually, I'm just going to split this a little bit. David, could you tell us a little bit about your role entering the foundation and helping them think about strategy and what they should do? And then when we go forward a little bit, could you tell us a little bit about, you then plugged into CEO and the leadership. How did that fit into the picture that Rebecca described?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here today with all of my colleagues. So I was brought in when Mr. Bechtel had the idea, the money was on the table. They had identified many of these grantees, but the foundation had never worked nationally. It only worked in California. Most of these groups were national. So they wanted someone who knew the national scene. I'm not a youth development person by any means, but I knew many of the CEOs, including Jennifer, for a long time from doing organizational development work. And so I brought that perspective, and together we hammered out I think it was a 2-page strategy for how we were going to go forward, presented it to Mr. Bechtel, who was in his 90s and still participating actively, wanted to know what we were going to do and make sure it fit with his goals. And then soon after that, I was asked to actually run the initiative initially and supervise all of the staff in the foundation who were assigned to it, who were taken from other places. There was no one who was really hired specifically for this initiative. They were doing other work and then kind of put together a team. So I actually worked at the foundation 3 days a week for several years until we got to the point that Rebecca really took over and I was able to step back. And so I was sort of a strategic advisor. One of the key things that we did early on was Rebecca sort of mentioned, we call them get to know you grants. Since the foundation didn't know these large grantees, rather than throwing millions at them as a first-time grant, there were smaller in quotes, grants of a few $100,000 with work to be carried out in a few months. So the foundation could see whether these grantees could actually perform on a set of objectives. And that really then helped to inform the work that we did going forward. Some of them also undertook business planning because this was going to kind of, this size of grant was going to really change some of the work they did. And we helped with that as well. I had a team for my firm that was involved in those pieces. Along the way, I remember as Rebecca was recounting the National Academy of Sciences meeting as not the most scintillating gathering I had ever attended. And so that's when we decided we had to do something that was more engaging of all the folks in the room, because there was a lot of energy, a lot of expertise, but the structure was one of people presenting these research findings. And so that's when we decided to bring in Michael to do the future convenings. And along the way, I can't remember where in the sequence this happened, but the idea came about to bring together the CEOs. And this is something I've done for years in other venues, CEO leadership development programs, those kinds of things, learning communities. So we started meeting as a separate group, the CEOs, during these national convenings that had a bunch of their senior staff doing other things. And a couple of those meetings, we actually brought their board chairs and we did some organizational development activities where CEOs do have venues for getting together. Board chairs never have any opportunity to get together with other board chairs. So we did a lot of sort of education and sharing of what it takes to succeed in those roles, which was very powerful. And then those meetings continued for as long as the in-person meetings were going on. Then when COVID hit, a really interesting thing happened that we went from meeting 2 to 3 times a year with those in-person convenings to meeting monthly on Zoom as a kind of combination SWAT team response to COVID, as all these groups were quickly trying to move to a digital platform, and mutual support therapy group for all these CEOs who were struggling with so many pressures in their organizations, financial pressures, collapse of their summer program. So for over a year, we met monthly. And then now that the initiative has ended, the funding has ended, the CEO group has continued and is continuing sort of on its own hook to meet irregularly, but still has a sense of place there.
I love that. That's kind of a great outcome of a multi-year work to build trust and connection and relevance. When you started it at the beginning, because my assumption when you started at the beginning, David, was, well, these folks are competing for resources. Why are they going to give away their trade secrets in a room? So why did you know that was going to work? What was it in the design that really made that happen? Obviously, you can ask Jennifer here in a moment, but what was your art to that?
I myself was a nonprofit CEO for 16 years, and I knew that there's this term I love, coopetition, which is that people are competing and cooperating. We're not in a cutthroat kind of business in the nonprofit world. We're all trying to achieve the same social ends. And of course, we want the resources so our organization can do it. We want to sort of be first in line for some of those resources. But my experience over 2 decades of working with CEOs is that the competition does not really rear its head in these situations. We will be in these discussions and people will talk about their funders and say, we have a relationship with this funder and they might put some money on the table for this. There are conversations about sort of working together on some initiatives. There, for example, some of the site-based groups like the Y have had some of the not site-based groups like Coaching Corps partner with them, or Playworks partner with them. It's been a very nice kind of a thing. And what what I think drives that is that the CEOs in their organizations have a unique role, and there's no one in their organization that quite gets it the way someone outside their organization in a parallel role gets it. And so talking to those other people is really rejuvenating, therapeutic, it's sustaining for people in these leadership roles. And so I just didn't think it was going to be a problem, and it wasn't. In fact, I would say the two biggest challenges to the CEO leadership group was first convincing the funders that they should not be in the room, which is every time I do this, I have that conversation. It's like, no, they don't need to have their funders in the room. It makes it hard. And people got that at the foundation. And then interestingly, when we did these big convenings that Michael was running, and we were running sort of a parallel CEO group, and the CEOs just wanted to meet all day by themselves, the staff really wanted the CEOs in their meetings. And so there was this tension between doing what the staff wanted and doing what they themselves wanted. And we kind of ended up balancing that out. So that was kind of an interesting challenge.
Oh, that's great. And you know, I'm reminded that there's kind of some stacking coherence here, where the character initiative wanted to look at adults closest to youth. How do we help them get better? But to do that, you kind of have to think up the chain of custody all the way to the CEO, and you even said board chair, and give those adults opportunities to learn from each other. Well, let's go down a layer here and go to Michael, who really works some magic to create unique learning spaces. And you know, Michael, what I'm hoping you'll talk about too when you go into this is a little bit about how you had to adapt over time. So can you tell us about, you know, just some of the things you brought to the table from other community practices, and then when you came to this, what role did you want to bring forward here?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So kind of in my work over the last 20 plus years, I've worked a lot with multi-party gatherings, kind of different organizations coming together who have some common goals and needing to find how they can partner and cooperate with each other. In the previous 10 years, I've done a lot of work in early childhood organizations with Montessori and other groupings, coming together to kind of really find what they had in common, overcome some barriers and bad history to really be able to amplify together what they could not achieve alone. And I think a similar spirit came in through here in the National Character Initiative. You know, that each of these organizations, as Rebecca said, you know, they're serving together half the kids in the country. But they each bring particular backgrounds, particular experiences or perspectives, and they recognize quite early on that they could benefit from interacting, learning, and sharing with each other. So that's what we try to do. You spoke about the sort of some of the uncertainties and the ambiguity. I think that was a feature of it, because starting, we didn't quite know how it was going to turn out. And so we actually had the advantage of recontracting each year around, okay, so we've finished this year's work, here's what's coming up, here's what we're learning, what makes sense to do next year. So that was actually a gift in retrospect when we look back on it, because we didn't start with a big blueprint plan and so just implement on and on year after year. We were having to continually paying attention. And so this kind of graphic that's on the screen at the moment is sort of a frame that we've developed coming out of this work and other work that we do that acknowledges the importance of just beginning, right? Rebecca spoke about coming together, communing together, finding out about each other, working out if it's going to be safe to be with each other, how vulnerable can I be with my peer/competitors and with my funder present. So what do we do about all of that? But once we've got a good foundation from that solid work on the beginning, we're then ready to enter this work in the middle, where we're really diving into the content of the work, the topics, exploring partnerships. And I think that's where a lot of the further trust building happened, and some of the synergistic opportunities that had not been anticipated to start with. An example of this was hearing requests to do work around equity. And so finding a resource person to come in, lead some work on that in one of our sessions, and then let that go further. And that led to a new funding initiative for the foundation. The final part of all of this work, and it happens within a meeting, within one convening, but also over the arc of the whole program that we ran for 5 years, is the importance of ending, right? And so concluding, appreciating and acknowledging what you've learned from each other, turning to implementation. So how am I going to use what I've learned here and turning that forward? So that was what we were planning to do. We had a big final gathering planned for August of 2020. And if anybody's thinking back in their dates, you'll have seen where we made a fundamental error. We had not checked to see whether or not there would be a global pandemic happening at that time. And so we ended up having to not do our final gathering, and instead, much like the CEO group did, meeting monthly, we convened all the leaders from different organizations, different roles, in a series of very topical webinars and knowledge exchanges as people were grappling with COVID, how to adapt with online learning, dealing with the equity issues in the wake of George Floyd's murder, all the sorts of issues we were grappling and working with through that period, being responsive and coming to a close to help organizations transition to what happened, their ongoing work after the foundation closed. So that's just a very, very quick description of what we try to do. I will say one final point is David worked with the CEO group. There were a total of 5 peer groups, about 20 people in each group. And then there was another big group, the 6th group, which was the meta group. All of the participants working and coming together, learning together, exchanging together. So there was a lot of great experiences, and Tasha and Jennifer will be able to speak to their experiences in 2 of those groups. Back to you, Aaron.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That was amazing, and it was quite a ride, and we had to learn every step of the way and change it. And your slide, I think, captures that, which is it's not you really do have to keep evolving. Well, let's turn to Jennifer Sarangelo. I'm very excited to see her.
Hi, it's been a while, Aaron. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for making the time today. Well, this is very exciting because you got to experience this from the CEO group, but then also see how your staff and your organization joined the learning experience as a whole. But to tell us first about the CEO community of practice, and now it's all no holds barred. Like, just give us the straight juice here. How was this? Could we have done it better? What were the benefits?
Yeah, well, I would say I really don't I would say it was a fabulous experience, so good that I have been a part of the leadership of keeping it going with David's help for now what would be over 2 years since the official ending or sunsetting of the foundation. So I think that starting with that, I want you to hear it was very valuable to me personally and to all of us. And what's kind of cool is the group has stayed together, and as David said, we don't meet as often. It was so interesting that as he said, we met every month, and we called it kind of a group therapy session because no one had been through anything like this. None of us knew what was coming. And we really, so it was extremely important during COVID. We had probably 80% attendance at every meeting. And we had no agenda. It was always what's top of mind, what's everybody working on. And we were, as he said, but I want to just share some of my reflections on what was most valuable, if that's okay. And you asked here about what were lasting things. One of the questions I was asked was, what are things that lasted in my organization or impacts from this group? But let me start with what it meant to me. And first is, David already articulated a lot of it because he was with us all along the way and still is. But one of the things, in addition to what he said, that I wanted to add is that it also, once we got, even during COVID, but even before and after too, in different ways, it really gave us a space for what I would consider marketplace intelligence. And that was the overall convenings too. So, but certainly the CEO group, hearing what was on their mind. Let me give you a couple of examples of things that, I've been able to take back to my board, to my executive team, things around, we talked about, what are you experiencing in cyber threats? We had a couple that had major ransomware, and we learned from that. We had major crisis management that we talked through. David will remember that meeting, where it was awesome because we got real. We had groups and CEOs that were in the news, in the New York Times, things were flying around in the media, and we wanted to hear what was really going on because we wanted to learn for our own organizations, but also empathize. So David will remember that one. So it was very real time. Very, like I would say the one lesson learned, I would say, is when we tried to structure the agenda too much, it really lost the value for the CEOs. We wanted to talk about what was hot and new and challenging, and it got really good. David will remember when he invited the CEOs to bring forward the agenda items. So we each had the opportunity to bring forward something, and that's when it really got good. And that's kind of where it is maintained. So those are a couple of things. A couple of quick things that I want to tell you really helped my organization from this were, number one, I mentioned kind of marketplace intelligence. That is definitely true in both the CEO group, but also in the full convening. When Rebecca talked about the different thought leaders that they were bringing to the table, just having, 50 of the 58 million kids in America, we served over half. I think the number is actually, or close to, you're right, half of them. Bringing that thought leadership around the new brain science, around young people and their malleability, all of that was coming out, that was a huge game changer for me as the leader at National 4-H Council, because I ensured then that it gave me the knowledge so that I could clear a pathway for our evaluators and our program people to really blow it out. It ended up changing our youth development theory of change. So we adapted and updated that nationally. And I was just last week training our board on that, which is all a result of getting that new information at the convening. On the CEO side, some of the specific things that helped us was we talked as CEOs about needing a diverse pipeline for our board. This was in like 2017, 2018, whenever we first started convening. So I got really good ideas. We shared ideas with each other. So I had a really built more of a pipeline. So going into 2020, I already had like my alumni that were in leadership roles, diverse alumni teed up, and we brought on 3 board members of color during 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. But that was only because I'd had that time a few years earlier to talk with my peers, get some strategies, build a pipe that I could then execute during a time when we needed it very much. And it has been extremely helpful to us going forward, has changed some of our fundraising. But those are just kind of 2 examples. The last one I want to give, my third, is seeing and learning how other national organizations were handling DEI initiatives at the national level. We already had a lot going on locally at states and a lot of regional things in 4-H. But kind of watching what my peers were talking about, we were all kind of building a lot of things at the same time. That ended up being an 4-H equity strategic plan, which is posted on our website. And just about a month ago or 2 months ago, I got a call from Canada 4-H. They loved our equity strategic plan. They asked our architect of that to come up. Thankfully, she was from Minnesota. She said, "Oh, that's perfect. It's just like Canada." So they'll believe it can happen here. And I met with the Canadian 4-H board to talk about their equity strategic plan that they aspire to, that will likely be modeled off the one we put together as a result of all that I learned and my team learned from the equity convenings that the foundation did. So just a couple of great outcomes for our organization.
Yeah, and you know what you made me think is it's almost like you formed your own chamber of commerce, right? Because the grants were about changing practice, but to change practice, you have to change systems. But to change systems, you have to think about the business of nonprofit work, of youth development work, and those all kind of went together. That's amazing. Well, let's turn to Tasha, who, okay, let's see. Here she is. I've been excited for this. Tasha, you were there really early on. You had your colleagues in all parts of the community of practice. What is the impact of the involvement in the community of practice for your team and for the Ys writ large? Because you might even want to say something about the model of the YMCA's, because it's pretty bad.
Absolutely. So glad to be amongst family and friends again. I'm Tasha Johnson with the National Office of the YMCA here in the United States. I'm just so inspired because I personally started out in the program community of practice, and at the end of the experience, as folks migrated in different positions, landed in the strategy community of practice. And I know this theme is about really more than money. And so Aaron, that's super, super important. As someone who works with folks who are really close to the direct service of being change makers for young people, for us, it was about being the adult that one needed as a child. And so that's a game changer in how we approach gathering. So all of the network experiences that Jennifer and others have talked about, both from an architectural perspective, bringing folks together. As you know, there are many affiliates, and it can be very challenging to bring all of those local communities around a single best practice. But we wanted to make sure that our young people and those who are supporting young people were amply, efficiently, critically equipped to prepare the youth for their 21st century world and not ours. And in so doing, we learned that we were not alone in the process. So David mentioned this concept of competition or cooperation, I think it was. The closer you were to the program folks, we really didn't feel that. We didn't have to shake kind of our uniforms off because we could get easily around the idea of putting young people at the heart of our work, at the heart of understanding how do you equip youth development practitioners? How do you support young people to develop character or to strengthen their muscle of social emotional learning along the spectrum of child development? We also knew that as much as we have some amazing things happening, both prior to the pandemic and certainly to date at the YMCA across the country here in the United States, we needed to confirm that we were as legendary as we had believed. And if we were not, then what do we do about it? So forcing us, by association with all of the other partners that Rebecca mentioned, as well as engaging in our own mindset of continuous improvement, we had to bridge research and practice. And that would be that third prong, that one I would make as a recommendation and also as a reflection, that we knew that research, right, asking good questions about the what, the now what, and the so what, which are frameworks of critical reflection, had to happen certainly at the onset or at the beginning of the experience, the investigation, the inquiry, the gathering, the collaboration, and had to be a non-negotiable standard throughout, from front end to, as Michael mentioned with his framework, to finish.
Very succinct. Thank you, Tasha. It's so good to see you. Well, I think we can zoom out now and get everyone on this. There we go. Please, everyone, activate your cameras. Well, I think, Jennifer and Tasha both gave us really concrete examples of how this benefited their work. Rebecca, David, Michael, what would you add based on what you heard?
Well, one thing I wanted to revisit was this work we did on equity that Michael and Jennifer referenced. So, I think that one advantage of having this multi-year community was that we could really respond to the grantees' needs as things were changing in the world. And, this was all previous, prior to 2020. But there were more and more conversations about racial equity within these organizations, within the field, within philanthropy. And, frankly, we were working with a fairly conservative foundation. However, internally, we had started to do that equity work ourselves at the foundation. And I think the timing of that was really beneficial, that internally our staff were asking for, we want to have more open conversations about racial equity, about structural racism, implicit bias. And we were going through a training process from our leadership, through all levels of staff. And when we started hearing at the convenings that the grantees were also having these same internal conversations, sometimes struggling, how do we get this elevated within our organizations? Can we use this convening space for some co-learning? It's that all of these levels of our staff can be learning together and bringing it back to our organizations. We were able to bring that back to our leaders, and there was a receptivity, because we were going through that learning ourselves, to think about how to, create that learning space for folks coming in at all different starting places. And so, we had to be really thoughtful about that, about what type of speakers, facilitators we could bring in, and the approach to the work. But the conversation evolved. It wasn't a one-time conversation. You can't solve it in one day. And what we did is we continued to gather feedback about how to push it forward and create the resources and space for the organizations to do the learning they wanted to. And so we continued in every convening after that. We pushed the conversation further along, and eventually it led to us actually putting more money on the table. So that was not part of the strategy we had, but we pitched it internally and said, you know what, we've got 2 more years at these organizations. They want to do more capacity building around this. If we could give them some flexible funds to deepen this work internally, we think that'll go a long way. And Jennifer, I see you have something you want to add.
When you're done, I wanted to add it when you were done.
Yeah. I can leave it there. I think it was an interesting way that, because we had built this trust with the grantees, it was an easier pitch for us as foundation staff to say, this is something they're asking for. We know we need to do it well and thoughtfully, and we think we can do it in partnership with them.
Well, I was just going to add, Rebecca, I confirm everything you said. It was and I already shared my kind of ultimate example of that. But one of the specific, I would say, more meaningful and kind of leadership lessons I learned was from your CEO sharing with us her personal leadership journey in equity. And I've never seen that before. And it was extremely meaningful. So in addition to funding us to try new things and to, invest funds and things we've always wanted to do, but nobody would fund for us related to equity. The foundation, as Rebecca said, did their own journey and then shared with us what was happening. In particular, the leader was very impactful for the CEOs. Very vulnerable.
Tasha.
And I want to ping off of that as well, between Jennifer and Rebecca, just to really extract, when we think about this idea of the grantor-grantee relationship, is meeting the grantee where they are. So definitely, as the National Office of the YMCA, where we consider ourselves kind of a legacy organization, the brand spans the globe, but recognizing that this work was the onset of a shift of the WISE youth work. We know that probably many of the folks who are listening and folks who have been on the thumbnails have had some Y experiences in youth development, right? You went to Y camps, you learned to swim, you were on a basketball league as a result, but we really wanted and needed the capacity and the support to transition beyond just those great places to work out and great places to learn how to swim and to swim. And so being a part of this experience, and Rebecca specifically and other program partners and staff that were with the foundation, gave us the room to fail, gave us the room to grow, gave us the room to also celebrate our successes with others. And so out of that, and I know Sarah's going to be sharing some resources post-webinar, my research partner and I, who is now with Clarity Research and Writing, were able to step back and partner with other organizations and actually publish what we were doing. So this translation work, so we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, even focusing on the equity piece, when those equity resources were available, we germinated a novel idea around a strategy related to boys and young men of color with those additional resources. And the funder gave us enough room to play, enough room to tendril into partners, enough room to lean on their insights, even when they were sunsetting. So, you know, folks could be thinking about their own livelihoods. Where's my next job? You know, how do I pack up these boxes in the time allotted? But nothing ever changed from the support. And so that was just, as this theme is, way more than money.
That's excellent. You know, I want to get to ripple effects a second, because as funders, when we're forming strategies, we can take credit for those goals we name, but there can be so many secondary effects, good and bad, that we don't understand. And I would just add to all of you, you know, and just for a second, because Lori Dax, the president of the Bechtel Junior Foundation, was brought up, and Lori's leadership style was one that she wanted to learn, not just from the good, but from what didn't go so well. And I think what Jennifer, you were remarking on, was that she was very honest about that. And the national character strategy itself, as I mentioned at the outset, was informed by all things we had learned from other funders and from grantees. And let's not make those mistakes again. So, you know, understanding that sometimes the best lessons are the ones that come from things that didn't go well. Does somebody want to talk about ripple effects, good and bad, so that our audience can understand the consequences of these convenings and what they could take away from it? And I'll let anybody jump in on that. Tasha, you can go first too if you want, because your hand is still raised.
I can start. So I have this this thing when we talk about research and practice merging. Also, there is life and death between idea and implementation. And so when we talk about barriers, Aaron, the notion that, you know, there are many dreamers in the world, right? We lay on the, as you see my beach background, you lay on these backgrounds and you muse over napkins and over cocktails around ideas, but really systematizing, particularly for us, where we have a model where there at the time were more than 800 individual whys. And just in this experience around character alone, 26% of them, more than 200 whys over the 5-year period, participated in the experience. Bringing people together around a common agenda, which is part of the collective action approach. Being able to have honor and respect for the variants in different communities for which YMCA serve, but also being laser-like focused on the end, which is making sure that our practitioners were able to be equipped, both in skill and will, to support those young people for their 2022 post-pandemic world, and not our pre-pandemic world, or the adulting world, if you will. And so being able to name goals, develop goals, co-construct with folks, and not necessarily have that top-down, push-down effect on the local affiliates could be a barrier if it is not articulated, one, thoughtfully, literally writing it down, literally not going to your usual suspects to get use case or user information, and also with support, holding ourselves accountable for the identified and named change. Really important to engage those influencers, maybe folks who are at the C-suite level, your CEOs, your school superintendents, your heads of boards, school boards and nonprofit boards, as well as the folks who are what we call point of service, who are on the front of the experience of change for our youth, respectively, in the communities. I have to give a shout out to Dr. Karen Blase from University of North Carolina, who was on my local advisory board, because she is was our guru and godmother of the translation of implementation science, bridging art and science together, so that we did not experience the death between idea and implementation.
Thank you for sharing that. Other ripple effects, good and bad. And I think we want to bring the critical honesty forward to help our audience really learn from us. Who wants to jump in?
So I'll start. I wanted to talk about risk. The Bechtel Foundation culture was not very risk friendly. It grew out of an engineering firm where you don't want to take risks, you want to nail everything down. And so when we started the initiative, we said we're going to take some risks with some of these grants. They're big grants, so even a large organization could flop with a lot of money. And some of these smaller organizations, it's a risk just getting involved with them. And so the get to know you grants helped with that. So we sort of took baby steps. But I think what was really critical in giving the senior management and then the board confidence was the level of engagement that Rebecca and the rest of the team had with the grantees. That when we did site visits, we met with folks, we really knew them. They told us, warts and all, what was going on. And so when we came back to the powers that be at the foundation, we could answer their detailed questions about like our level of confidence, what we thought might fail. And we had some grants that didn't work out exactly the way that we would have wanted them to, but it's a testament to the whole process that we got that far. Many foundations I've worked with claim that, we take risks, we welcome failure, but you never hear anybody having a failure. Because program officers all have to report everything being successful. And so that was different here. And I thought that was unique, and it's something that I've taken away in working with other foundations around the way that they engage with their grantees to gain trust, so that people really know the program officers are on their side.
Well, I like that answer a lot, David, because it reminds me, for Stephen Bechtel and Lori Dax, who is Stephen Bechtel's daughter, president and CEO of the Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the relationships and trust were critical to the grant making. So that was an attribute of their approach. And therefore, the risk part was a test to the trust. So how do we get that together? What other kinds of ripples, good and bad, here that we really can mine to help our audience learn from this?
So I want to speak about the power of relationships. And David has spoken about one aspect of it, that Rebecca and her colleagues as the program officers fostered, I think, very productive, supportive relationships with the individual organizations, so that they felt welcome, in coming together for these peer convenings. They weren't suspicious about motives and things like that. So that's critical. The other thing is that, with this group of 80 to 100 leaders that we brought together over the 5 years, it wasn't a monolithic group. It wasn't just a big room of 80 people. There were the 5 peer groups. There was the big group of all, but we also had much, much smaller, more intimate conversations. And I'll mention sort of a tactic called peer coaching or peer consulting. In small groups of maybe 3 or 5 or 6 people, it's a chance for somebody to describe an issue that they're facing right now in their work, and have a very close-knit group of people share ideas, advise them on what to do next. And this is important. This is kind of confidential conversations, because I know that some of the conversations were about, I'm here in my role as a program lead, and my biggest obstacle to change is my CEO at the table over there, right? Advise me, how do I work with them to help our bigger effort go forward? So, people were talking about really very vulnerable things because of relationship, because of trust. And I think that's important. I will say, in terms of ripple effects, we heard about how the CEO group has continued to meet over the last couple of years, and that's really encouraging. And I think, a reality is that they have access to resources that many of their staff don't have. Right, so we had a lot of interest from the other groups, strategy, program, evaluation, and so on, to also continue to meet. But they didn't have as easy access to funding to engage, support, to help bring them together and support the conversation. So they've, to some extent, worked on personal interest, but it hasn't been sustained at an institutional level. And I think it's not about lack of interest, not about lack of relationship, but it is a point to the importance of resourcing funding as lubricants to enable these conversations to continue.
Thank you for that. And I'll invite one more because I'd love to hear Rebecca, and then I thank Tasha, but I want to encourage the audience to ask questions, and we'll take some hard ones if you got them. We're folk, you know, you can see we are very collegiate. We worked together for a long time. So as Tasha said, it's like being back with family. So please do push us. Rebecca, what would you say about this ripple effect question and consequences of good and bad?
Yeah, I wanted to just build off of a few things that were said. So the partnerships was a huge one. So, you know, when we started bringing these organizations together, I remember our teams had a sheet to track, like, oh, we heard about this organization working with this one in this way, and then this, and we keep reporting these back to the foundation, honestly, as partly ways to keep validating the, you know, investment we were making in bringing folks together. And then it became too many to even track. And those partnerships continue today. So I know, you know, Boys and Girls Clubs and Playworks have expanded their partnerships, where Playworks is training club staff to run recess in their local schools, now spread across the country. You know, YMCA worked with Positive Coaching Alliance quite a bit. I mentioned Positive Coaching Alliance and Coaching Corps are now merged. I'm not saying we have anything to do with that, but certainly had they not had that relationship and partnership developed through this community, I would argue they may not be in the same place they are today. You know, so those are just a few, but it's really too many to name the ways that these organizations continue to partner together. And I've heard directly, I have the honor of actually working with many of these organizations in a different capacity now, and more in a partner role. And I hear directly from folks like, you know, if they were part of the strategy or the program lead, they'll be in these meetings and, you know, other meetings where they're in the same room with these other youth organizations, and they have a stronger relationship with their colleague in the same position at another organization than they might even within their own, with their decision makers. And they'll be having side conversations like, okay, this conversation is happening officially at this table, but how can we work behind the scenes to actually make this partnership move forward in a productive way? So like those types of deep relationships are going to continue to have a ripple effect in our field, in the youth development field. And I know folks have moved even to other organizations, from one grantee organization to another. And, you know, so thrilled to see those types of relationships continue. One of our peer funders, Susan Crown Exchange, is continuing to work with many of those sports coaching organizations, and actually many of our support team, Michael Randel, AIR, and Collaborative Communications are back together again, supporting another set of cohort of grantees and convenings. So it's just awesome to see that many of those lessons are moving forward in that capacity. And then one other piece I'll just mention around this vulnerability that, you know, our president, Lori Dax, showed with the CEOs. She also showed this with other funders. So I mentioned that we invited other funders to one of the convenings so that they could learn about the grantees' work. And we had a separate funder-only meeting at that convening. And Erin, you moderated a fantastic conversation there as well, where we had our CEO, our education director, myself, my colleague, the other program officer, kind of a tell-all experience of the strategy and what went well, what didn't, what did we anticipate happening, and what might have been a surprise. And I think it was the most, you know, honest funder-to-funder conversation that many of these folks had ever participated in. And they shared things like, that was the best program officer training I'd ever received. And I've gone to many trainings. So I think that openness from the foundation, I hope, has had some impact on many of those other funders that we worked with, and are still partnering with many of these organizations.
Thank you, Rebecca. I mean, you're bringing me back, and what, you know, this is a great way to recall this and reflect, but it was hard at the time. We had to learn as we go. Tasha.
Yeah, I would also say that a ripple effect is being the bravery that we acquired and the courage to bring the funder or the grantor into some internal conversations. I would say that when you are a large organization or any organization that has some brand recognition around how you go about doing your work, it is natural to default to, you know, this is how we do it, and feel like we're a unicorn or again, legendary, mythical in some ways. Or someone may say, and I'll use my own organization, this is our why way of doing it. And so even as data start to emerge, whether it affirms and confirms your legendary status, or it begins to shake the trees. Having that external perspective can be the fresh surge of oxygen that you need to resuscitate, that you need to make course corrections, that sometimes internally, individually or by department or even organizationally, we don't necessarily have the strength to do. So I found that the relationships that we have developed with like organizations, as mentioned earlier, and also the experience that we had being a part of the community of practice gave us some ways to break through the norms, particularly what we were able to learn from the equity infusion that we got near the end of our relationship, that we needed to go slow, that sometimes efficiencies as they were executed in the past were not necessarily equitable practices, or they were in fact reifying the status quo and contrary to what we were assuming as an anti-racist system bucking stance. And so having our funder to either sing from the same song sheet or to hold us accountable for those grantor deliverables that felt a little bit revolutionary, actually in fact helped us get out of being kind of the usual suspects or the usual way of going about doing our youth work. So I can say that that was a breath of fresh air and an appreciation that is still ongoing in our relationship and learnings, both in those informal community practice like others that we've kept going, as well as the work has butterflied into other places.
Thank you, Tasha. And we have a question from a program officer. I'll read it from their perspective. I have noticed some CEO EDs of funded partners are hands-off with communications. They have designated program level staff to enter into relationships or communicate with grant makers, program officers, or they only communicate with the executive leadership of the foundation, bypassing the program officers completely. We know that pain. What strategies did you implement within the community of practice and other efforts to address these type of power dynamics that can disrupt or interfere with collaborative partnerships and or responsive convenings and deeper system change work? Rebecca, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'm sure David and Jennifer both have thoughts as well. I think there were multiple ways we did this from the beginning with those get to know you grants. We actually had David and his team reaching out directly to these leaders even before he identified which foundation he was working with to really understand where they were at organizationally, what kind of supports they need and how their organizations would function. We then had meetings with those leaders directly. So that was the next step. We traveled out to see them and getting to know their organizations work in a different way. These were significant size grants. So I did have regular contact with Jennifer and the other CEOs. Some of them would join our monthly meetings. As I said, as Erin mentioned, we were very engaged, or David mentioned this, as program officers, we attended their events. We had regular contact on a monthly basis. And many of them would join those conversations. Others, I might have separate conversations with those CEOs, especially of the larger organizations, and became partners. I would go to some of their board meetings. So we really became integrated partners there. But I think that CEO convening was ultimately the biggest hook for being engaged in this work, because they gained so much value out of being there with their peers. And really the CEOs asked the foundation to convene them. It wasn't our idea at first. They said, this is really valuable. Could you just give us the space to meet and a facilitator, and we'll get ourselves there. And they, it kept happening. So I'll stop there, but David or Jennifer might want to add.
Sure. If you just 1 second, I'd just add one more thing. I do want to lift off what Tasha said about courage. And that's actually one of the things I think that convening people that are in similar roles does, is it really does give you more courage to try the new things, step forward with the new things. And I'll tell you the real reason, the bottom line reason that this worked was these were significant grants. Any CEO who isn't going to meet with a program officer at the Bechtel Foundation at the size grants they were giving, I would question their, executive leadership. That's one of our main jobs, is to ensure the organization's mission is resourced. And so giving the grant size they did gave them access to me, certainly in our organization. But I do think the convening really helped. And I also just think there are CEOs that aren't as comfortable, I'll be honest, in the fundraising arena. They never learned it, or are worried that they might mess it up. I think a few of them who just don't feel comfortable in that space. So I think there might be more vulnerability than you might think in that area for CEOs too.
I just wanted to add that I really feel for this person's question, because it's hard to be in an organization and know, like, why do things work the way they do? And what I'll say is there is no normal. Every organization develops a different way of doing things at different times under different configurations of people in the organization at that time. So in one organization, you may see that the CEO wants to do all the communication. That's probably in a smaller organization. In a larger organization, it's going to be delegated to people, either a comms staff or to the program people. That's based on a trust and kind of internal cultural dynamic that people develop over time. And so what I will say is, while there's no normal, there is good and bad. There are ways in which these things work and ways in which they don't work. And if you have a dysfunctional way of communicating where people are caught short because they don't know what's going on, and their messaging isn't on the same page, that's problematic. But any system that works so that people feel like they know what's going on, they know who to go to in a communication situation, can be functional. But I hear the complexity in this question, and I feel for being in that situation.
Oh, yeah, and I'll just answer this too, because I've been in that situation. I spent 15 years in philanthropy, and when I started, the Kellogg Foundation's logic model and Paul Brest, the Hewlett Foundation's theory of change framework were what guided our work. We had to have rigor, and we had to make our grantees or grant seekers jump through hoops, and what are the outcomes going to be? And is the strategy aligned with our theory of change? We're in a trust-based philanthropy moment, and I'm not sure, at least from my perspective, we quite know what the rigor is for that. We're trying to get to this place where we're trusting grantees. That sounds like openness. It's like maybe a grantee should talk to the CEO and president. Maybe this isn't just about the program officer. So I think from my experience, these things change and change over time as the field of philanthropy changes. But there's another part of this, which just in an organization, and another time, another webinar, we can talk about this. You got to learn to manage up and within your foundation. And it kind of takes a little bit of courage there to push and say, you hired me for my expertise and knowledge of this field. You've got to let me use this, and here are some ways how. And it's a real challenge, because that tension between externally facing grant making staff and the internal spine functions and rigor, it's not always, it's like two different worlds. So hang in there, bring your expertise forward, and just do the best you can with it. It's not going to be perfect every time. We have 2 minutes.
I'm sorry.
Please. No, go ahead.
I was trying to add something really tactical.
Bring us home, bring us home. With the 2 minutes, Tasha, it's all yours.
Tactically, for I put this in the response for the folks who are doing direct service. Bring in your principal, bring in your program lead, the person who strokes the check, whose name's on the check, should be a part of the cross-functional. They need to do site visits with you. They need to be in planning conversations. So be strategic about when you make those invitations and what's on the meeting agendas. And that way, and then also co-construct, right? Figure out how everybody gets to contribute to whatever those named goals are, those metrics for accountability. Real tactical way. Can't just be a single person, because when it goes great, right, we don't want to celebrate by ourselves, but also most things when they go awry is not just one person's fault.
Well, we got one question under the wire, and I can't help but want to answer it from Nolan Marshall. Is anybody working with creating a resource to work in or with school leaders to integrate external resources? Resources are needed to meet the unmet needs of children, and certainly schools need support, families need support, to make whole child connections and experiences and programming available. Tasha and Jennifer, what is your advice there? What are ways schools can learn how to partner and integrate external assets and people? I know you just shared part of that answer, Tasha.
Yeah, no worries. So it's a stale resource, but under President Obama's leadership, he put together a What Works clearinghouse. So they're not contributing to that anymore, but it still lives on. It'll tell you programs and practices that are evidence-based. So when a partner engages you in doing change maker work with young people, make sure it meets the tenets of what works. It's already vetted. It's your tax dollars are supporting it. Go to the U.S. Department of Education. I'm sure somebody can find it, or I can find that resource for you. But What Works Clearinghouse is a great first step to see if your partner at least meets the litmus test of change for youth work.
And I would say this next decade is what it's going to take to answer that question. It's clear that the research on what school need to do with kids and what needs to happen out of school is merging. Jennifer, what do you think? What is the advice here on how schools and community and external partners can come together?
Well, I was just going to say, this is such a local question. What I've seen is where I've seen it super creative, at least in 4-H and cooperative extension, has been when there's an opportunity to do things new with new funding. It's new tax dollars, a bond issue, a crisis in a school district, a crisis in a state, and there's new investment. I've seen kind of new pathways being forged. In addition, I've seen it done really scrappy with really creative local 4-H people meeting a need in a school district. So I think it goes high, it goes low. And what I've found is it has to have resources behind it. So where there's money, start looking for that. That's what that's how we coach our affiliates, is go, when there's new money, go looking for those opportunities.
Jennifer, thank you. We know you got to duck off a little early. So thanks for joining us today, and it was great to see you. Well, we're at that point where we can wrap it up for the final words on this, and let's remember, this is the grade level reading campaign network. It's been around. Oh boy, I can still remember when Ralph Smith came and talked to us about it when I was at the Packard Foundation a long time ago. But these are local networks, and this is a local question. And I think the people on this call are moving money not just through foundations, but school districts, maybe cities. Taking all what we just talked about today, what is our advice to them? What can they take from this and actually do next week, next month, next year? Tasha, you want to go first?
Sure, real quick. When you know better, you do better, you support better. So get smart about the art and the science. When you figure that out, act on it and do better. Support better.
That's good. We'll end with Rebecca. Michael, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think it's the power of partnership, so bringing people together, this notion of convening. But the difficult piece, I think, is about, particularly if you're the funder, you have interests and objectives, to not let that dominate whatever the group's going to work on. To have the space to trust the group, and it may take time to emerge, and it probably will be messy, but stick with it. And then you'll begin to see the fruits of it over time. Bring people together and trust them to see what it is that they want to work on and where it'll make the impact.
David.
I really want to second what Michael said. First of all, that's terrific. But I also want to say that organizations build relationships through people relationships. So people in other organizations, but it's not enough to just come together and talk. You have to bring your institution with you. And I think that some of what Jennifer was talking about, the partnerships between these organizations. So when you make relationships, when you meet people in your community doing work, think not just about that's a good person who I know who I can call, which definitely is important, but think also what resources does that institution have, or what resources does mine have that I could lend to them, that could help them, that could advance our shared agenda. And that's when you see real partnership, is when people really bring the folks behind them together towards shared goals, and we can do bigger things together.
Oh, that's lovely. Rebecca.
Yeah, my advice for local funders, you have convening power similar to we did on a national level. And, you inviting folks into the room is going to be, influential in itself. You're going to get folks in the room. Invest in the facilitation 100%. That's a worthwhile investment. And then be willing to step out of the room and mean it, like offer to be able to step out of the room and actually practice it. Sometimes they'll want you in the room, and that happened for sure. And other times there's conversations better had without the funder there. And I think, modeling that is important.
Well, and just to move towards wrapping this up, what I want to share is, clearly we are a divided country right now. We all feel it, but we all want our young people to be successful, and we're raising our kids together. So I just want us all, just as we talked about with these convenings, let's keep coming back to these learning conversations and try to figure this out for each other. I think there is enough commonality about what is known about how young people can be exposed to experiences and role models and opportunities and thrive, that we can find a common cause again. We all know we need our young people to do better than we've done it, clearly. So let's keep at it. I want to thank the panelists. It's been such a blessing and what a wonderful experience to see all of your faces again. I'm not sure any of you age. I'm over here with gray hair. Thank you. Let me turn it over to Sarah. Thank you for inviting us all to do this. This was amazing. I applaud all of you. Sarah.
Well, I'll just say a huge ditto to that, Aaron. A huge thank you to all of our panelists, including you, Aaron. I see no gray hair, so I don't know what you're talking about. But thank you to Rebecca Goldberg, to Tasha Johnson, to David LaPiana, to Michael Randel, and to Jennifer Sirangelo, who had to run off to start another meeting right about now. And again, thank you to Aaron for moderating this conversation. It was incredible to hear you all talk about how this effort was conceived, how it evolved over time, the lessons that you learned, the impact that it has had. And I'm going to hold on to this quote that you shared, Tasha, that when you know better, you do better and you support better. That's incredible. So thank you all for joining us and for sharing your insights and experiences with us. And thank you to all of you who joined in and listened and learned with me. I hope that you found it as inspiring and informative as I did. I hope that you will also continue to join us for future sessions in coming up. And I think we can bring up that slide in just a second. I just dropped some links in the chat so that you can register. We've got another session starting in about an hour that Learning Loss Recovery Challenge will explore how states and local districts are investing together, kind of aligning their investments for increased impact and durable change, addressing both data and student attendance, as well as teacher professional development. Next week, we'll have a session co-hosted by Ymca, looking at strategies for improving, making the transition into kindergarten more seamless and successful for the children and for the families. And then we'll kick off the month of July with a double header on July 5th, including a funder-to-funder conversation at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, co-sponsored by the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, followed by a session exploring state investments in children's early language and literacy development. So I hope you will all use the links that I posted in the chat and register and make plans to join us for those upcoming sessions. And also hope that you will make plans to join us for GLR week. As Sierra mentioned at the opening of the session, that will be July 18th through the 22nd. We'll have plenary sessions every day from 3 to 4:30 p.m. that week. And stay tuned for an email that will be coming out tomorrow with some information and registration links for that. So thank you again to our amazing panel, and thank you all to those of you who joined us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.